Hello everyone, my name is Shubhajit and today we will be discussing about the memo API in React. So what is the use of memo in React? So basically whenever we have a component and inside that we have one more component which is a child component and there are some props which are passed to the child component and there is a re-render happening in the parent component but the props which are passed to a child components are not changed. In that case, if you are using memo, then it will let you skip the re-rendering of the component when the props are unchanged. So whenever the props are unchanged, it will not re-render the child component again. It will keep that previous version of child component as it is on the UI. And it will only re-render the other parts of the UI which is present in the parent. I hope you have got a little bit glimpse of it, but still we need a better explanation with an example. So this is a form component in which we have two state variables. One is name and one is address. Now the initially what you guys need to know is these both name and address are having two-way data binding with this input text box which is using the name state variable, and there is one more input text box which is using the address state variable. Okay. And after that, we have a child component called greeting in which we are passing the name as the props. So we can conclude from this is in the parent component, we are using the name input text box, we are using the address input text box, and we have a greeting component inside which we are passing the name state variable as props. And what the greeting component looks like. So basically the greeting component is having an h3 with just a hello with the name coming as props. Okay. We also have a console log. So whenever this component loads, then this will be shown on the console. Greeting was rendered at this time. This is just to ensure that when this greeting component is called. I will show you in the demo what is the use of that. But for now, I hope you have understood the UI, what is happening. And also, if you are not aware of the use state thing, then you can go and see my uh, video on use state hook, and then you can come here and continue this. Okay, so here, whenever we try to change the input value name, then this name state variable is changed and this whole component is re-rendered. This whole UI is re-rendered. In that case, this greeting component will also be re-rendered. And that is very much ideal because it is using this name. Name is getting changed. So this needs to be called with the new value of name. But now let's say the address is being changed. And how it is changed? It is changed when we are inputting the value here. Okay, so now the address is being changed. This state variable is changed. That will trigger a re-render on the UI. Okay, but you see that there is no sign of address or there is no usage of address inside the greeting component, right? So in that case, according to you, should the greeting component be called or not? So I should say that the default behavior of React actually calls the child components even when there is a change in the props or not. Doesn't matter. It will call it. And they are child components also. If there is some component inside greeting, one more child component, then it will also be called. So this is how React works. But if we want to skip the re-rendering of this greeting component, why? Because the name is not changed, so the greeting component will also not change. So that is something which will be uh, time effective because greeting might be containing something which is very much expensive in time. which is taking a lot of time to be loaded on the UI. So unnecessary re-rendering of greeting we want to avoid. So for that we will use the memo API. Let me run this demo without the help of memo first. Okay, so here if you see, let me clear the console. If you see on changing the name, let's say something, you can see that okay, this console log is printed. It means the greeting component is called. And even if when we are changing the address component, this greeting component is again called. So for the name it is fine, but for the address it need not to be, right? Because greeting component is using only the name, and changing address should not call greeting component ideally, but React's default behavior does this. And if we want to skip this re-rendering and we want to only call the greeting component when the name is changed and not the address, so in that case we will use a memo. We will wrap the greeting component in memo, which we are importing from React, and this memo, and then export it. Okay, so it will, this memo will see that okay, is the name prop changed, which is passed from this form component, is the name prop changed? If it is not changed, then return the previous version of greeting only on the UI. Do not re-render it again. Now after adding the memo, let us see how it looks like. Okay, so these are coming as after refresh the initial render or the initial mount of the component happens, so the greeting is called, and this is the console log for that. Why there are two? As I have already mentioned, that due to the React's strict mode while running this in development environment, it runs the things twice to avoid errors. Okay, so now let me type some name, and the greeting component is called. That is ideal. That should be, because it is dependent on that name prop. But when we type this address, should it be called? No. So let's say I am typing anything, but there is no console log happening. Only when I am changing this name, the console log for the greeting component call was happening. So now you can understand that what we have saved here. Here we have uh, saved the calling of greeting component without, so when there is no change in the name, the greeting component will not be called. I hope you have understood all this. One more thing I also want to add, that here if you see name and address, they are just strings. They are primitives. They can also be integers, numbers, they can also be boolean values. So these all are primitives in JavaScript, and primitives value change in the prop can be handled by memo only. But what happens if this name is an object? Let's say it's an object and it is having some value inside that object, some key value pairs. Now, whenever a new key value pair, so whenever this component re-renders, a new key value pair, a new object will be created every time. Okay, and whenever a new object is created, the memo will actually uh, compare the props from this version to the previous version, and it will see there is a difference of the reference value of objects, because whenever an object is created, it has a different reference variable. It is pointing to a different reference. So in that case, what will happen is the memo will fail to uh, see that there is any difference between the objects or not. I'm saying that the memo will actually say that okay, a difference has occurred in the object, even though we haven't changed the signature of object at all. We haven't changed the content inside it. The content inside is same, but the only thing is that object, whenever it is created new, then it will have a different reference. So that's why In the case of objects and arrays, we will be requiring use memo hook, which we will be discussing in later video. And in case of functions, when we are trying to pass functions in this greeting component, let's say, then these functions are also stored in stored as references. Okay, so they also change when the whole component is re-rendered, and that's how again and again they will have different references and it will be called. So for skipping that, along with memo, we have to use the use callback hook. I don't want to go much deeper into that because it will confuse you. Just to understand these two things, objects and arrays, we have to use memo for them. For functions, we need to take help of use callback if we want to memoize them and don't want to call the greeting component unnecessarily in case of objects, arrays, and functions. So that's all about it, guys. I hope you have understood the video. And if you have any doubts, let me know in the comment section. I would be happy to help. Thank you.